Be sure to check out my second channel called Rob Explains. There you can check out videos where I explain things outside of comic books. So what I want to do here is be a little bit dangerous and dip my toe in the waters of Marvel's What If stories. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, Marvel's What If line of comics basically deal with alternate realities. It could be that things are very similar to our own, or it could be that things are radically different. For example, my video on Wolverine Kills the Marvel Universe, that's a what if story. What if Hydra and the Hand had not been stopped and Wolverine had stayed under their control? Well, then he basically just killed all the superheroes on Earth. That was effectively the story. But these what if issues, the one we're going to be talking about today actually, of the Punisher becoming Captain America, actually comes out of the Age of Ultron event. Now, for those of you guys who never saw my videos on that series, it was written by Brian Michael Bendis, and it basically centered on the idea of Ultron taking over the future and then using the Vision in the present as a way to take over the present, to effectively kill off superheroes. Of course, it dealt a lot with the time stream and different things like that, and Bendis made it very, very complicated. But the long and short of the story was that when it came to its end, Wolverine had rationalized that Hank Pym would always create Ultron. It was just in his genes as a scientist. He just had to know whether or not he could create artificial intelligence. And so even if Wolverine had traveled into the past and talked Hank Pym out of creating Ultron at some point in the future, Hank Pym would have made him anyway, just out of sheer curiosity. And as a result, Wolverine said that the only way to stop Ultron from coming into existence was to kill Hank Pym. And so while Wolverine was successful in killing him, the result was that because time was basically a living construct, and because people had traveled into the past throughout the history of Marvel Comics and meddled with time so much, Wolverine's actions were the straw that broke the camel's back, and quite literally, time broke, and it sent a whole bunch of ripples into the multiverse, changing things in their entirety. Now, while this was used by Marvel as a way to basically tie into Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers in order to start Secret Wars, with regards to this particular comic, this just shows us one of the multiverses, or I guess one of the universes in the multiverse, that was impacted by Wolverine's actions. And in this story, what Marvel does is they basically open up by giving us the regular gamut of Captain America stuff. That is to say, when he was first discovered by the Avengers in Avengers issue number 4, they give us a little bit of his history with regards to him and Bucky Barnes fighting together in World War II. But what Marvel also does is they tell us that because of the actions of Wolverine, Captain America simply just died. He just killed over. Now, whether it was because his brain was scrambled or something like that isn't really explained. It's really just kind of a plot device to kill his character off and initiate the story. But what we're told is that after the death of Captain America, because he was such an important symbol for the world and for the United States, the Avengers initially tried to cover it up. Now, again, we're not really told whose idea this was, but I would go as far as to say that because he's kind of a dick, it was probably Tony Stark. But but the overall theme here is that with Captain America effectively gone, inevitably the information leaked out. Someone somewhere told the press that Steve Rogers was dead, and because of this, America as a whole slipped into a state of decay. Now, the important thing about this, and what Marvel's really telling us here, is that Captain America is an icon. You know, he's more than just a guy that runs around dressed in the American flag beating people up, that he means something in the hearts and minds of Americans, and that because he died, it basically destroyed people's will to have a country that would continue down the path that they were used to. People effectively just gave up. Now, from here, we switch to Tony Stark talking to the Punisher. And what we're told here is that somewhere along the line after the death of Captain America, the United States most likely fell into war. Now, I would say this was probably a civil war, but the fact remains that we fell into a war in our entirety and the country went to pieces because of it. And so what Tony Stark does is, as he's talking to Frank Castle, he basically says that Frank Castle's a broken man, and he has been since his family died. But even more so with this particular war, having to watch innocent people struggle in a way that he hadn't seen since his time in Vietnam, it broke him even more than he was before. Now, the significance of this is that Tony Stark is basically just playing on the Punisher. He's playing on his emotions, playing on his thoughts, and he even goes as far as to offer him the position to be Captain America. Now, this is a huge deal, and the reason why is because it actually falls perfectly in line with the nature of Frank Castle. And what I mean here is that Frank Castle, during the Civil War event, had effectively admitted that the whole reason why he joined the Vietnam War, why he enlisted in the military to fight in that conflict, was because he idolized Captain America. Captain America was a hero during World War II. He fought against the Axis powers, against the Nazis, and Punisher, in his own mind, wanted to do the exact same thing. And so when he's offered the position to be the new Captain America by Tony Stark, in the end, he can't really turn it down. And so the result is that we're not really given what goes on behind the scenes, but somewhere along the line, the Illuminati of Namor the Submariner, Black Bolt of the Inhumans, Tony Stark, Reed Richards, Doctor Strange, and Professor Xavier had essentially come together, and they had altered the serum of Steve Rogers and implanted it into the Punisher. Now, exactly how this was modified, again, we're not really told. Marvel's just kind of throwing stuff at us, and they're not really giving us any in-depth information here. They're just saying, well, things happened. But what Reed Richards does tell us is that because they weren't able to duplicate the serum of Abraham Erskine, the person that originally made Steve Rogers Captain America, instead, Reed Richards actually put his mind to task and improved on it. This is really interesting because we've never seen an instance in Marvel Comics where Reed Richards has worked on the super soldier serum that gave Captain America his powers, or I guess gave him his abilities. We've never seen this before. And so this is actually a really cool concept. The downside to this is that the story is basically really poorly written, and so not much is done with it in terms of explanation or what it was that Reed Richards had done. But the fact remains that once the Punisher becomes Captain America or takes on the mantle, the country immediately starts to recover. Now, of course, while he's fighting these various Doombots, again, the reason why this ties in is because for the Punisher, aside from killing, him and Captain America are the exact same person. The Punisher's going after bad guys. He's defeating criminals. He's not killing them, but he never really needed to in the first place. And the great thing about this is that as the story continues, it basically just kind of grants Frank Castle this solace that he's been looking for. It grants him a place. Now, again, without Marvel giving us really, any real information here, I would say that in the mind of Frank Castle, this is really a necessity. This is something that he needed. With Steve Rogers being Captain America, Frank Castle couldn't be Captain America. He could only be the next best thing. Why it made sense to him to simply go through and start killing criminals is really just within the context of whoever's writing the Frank Castle stories at the time, and no one's really ever taken the time to expand on why it is that he's killing people aside from the fact that his family was killed. But in this particular story, he has something greater to aspire to, and this is really what Tony Stark was hitting home about when he initially offered him the position. And so what we're told is that as time passes, because Frank Castle is more ruthless than Steve Rogers was, because he's willing to go that extra limit to ensure that these criminals have a better understanding of where they relate to him as a person, in the sense that he beats the absolute hell out of them, the world begins to shift and it begins to change. No longer are things in a situation whereby villains have effectively taken over. Instead, they're beginning to retreat, they're beginning to cower, and America is responding to this very idea by pulling itself up by its bootstraps. And so from here, we basically pick up with what seems to be the rest of the Avengers, as well as Frank Castle, who has basically aspired and rallied everyone together. And so because of this, Tony Stark himself has been able to rally back, of course, build his empire even greater and larger, but more so than that, the Frank Castle Captain America has become a symbol for the world. He is now something that everybody aspires to, in the sense that there are so many different heroes out there who are becoming Captain America, or at the very least acting in accordance. They're dressing up as him, they're following the same tactics. He's effectively built a kind of culture, a counterculture around himself. Now, while there are individuals here and there who don't necessarily agree with his actions, one individual who does is a girl named Ava. Now, the reason why this matters is because as the years begin to pass, Captain America stops being a symbol of freedom within this particular story, and instead basically becomes a marketable concept, in the sense that people are selling toys based on him, they're selling all different kinds of merchandise and so on, and so he's become a means to make money. Now, I don't necessarily think it was the intention for this to happen, it just kind of unfolded that way because of his popularity. And so while Ava and one of her friends are playing around, because Frank Castle has long since retired from being Captain America, the notion here is that he's considered an old fogey, basically. He's just kind of an old guy that not very many people take seriously, but he also operates away from the mantle of being Captain America. He operates away from this concept, having left it due to the fact that he became disillusioned with the very concept of Captain America as it had become a marketable device. And so the result here is that while Ava begins to taunt him a bit, while she begins to sort of not really make fun of him, but in the sense that she basically tries to elicit a reaction from him, what she essentially says here is that she heard the legends about Frank Castle, Captain America. She heard the legends about how great he was, about how he fought off a Skrull invasion, essentially the secret invasion event how he was able to take on Thanos, by himself and effectively defeat Thanos using both his ruthlessness, his intelligence, and his enhanced strength, which was beyond what Steve Rogers originally had. But the person that she's currently looking at, the man that she sees, is a shadow of his former self. And the result here is that Frank Castle effectively reacts. He says that the problem with the entire concept of Captain America is that it's not about the greatness of the country anymore. It's about how much money can be made on his name. And so having walked away from that, having left, he didn't want to have anything to do with the concept. But for Ava, Captain America, despite being a marketable concept, despite being a means to achieve great amounts of wealth from those individuals who were making money on that name, he still stands for freedom. He still stands for what it means to be America and to be a human being in the eyes of the world. And so while Frank Castle, of course, his hardened ways and, not really having a soft heart, so to speak, effectively gives in, what he does is he begins training Ava personally on how to become Captain America. And so as the story begins to wrap up, we eventually find that Ava had enlisted as part of the US government and effectively taken up a role as part of the Captain America Corps, which is to say a huge part of the world, an army of people who are all operating under the mantle of Captain America. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. In truth, the story's not bad, but it's not the best. It's certainly not the best what if story, but I thought it was something relatively interesting. So if you guys enjoyed this video, just drop likes, post comments, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.